Yes, and the last session of the Freedom Convention is just starting. And our moderator will be Büşra Saraç. And after introducing her, I will be going away. And it's going to be her session. It's going to be her platform. So Büşra Saraç is a PhD candidate in University of Portsmouth, United Kingdom. Her work focuses on understanding the representation of Yazidi women's experiences of ISIS rule. Her research interest lies in exploring the intersections of security, gender-based violence, and the media. So Büşra, I think we are conducting a research together on violence against women, and I know that Büşra is really experienced in this field. So maybe, giving a very brief remarks on the issue before starting to introduce the speakers, that would be great, Büşra, if you don't mind. And thank you, and the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Hafsa. First of all, welcome to the third panel of Freedom Convention, which will be on discriminatory government policies against minorities, ethnicities, and dissidents. So, as Hafsa, mentioned, I'm going to moderate this panel. But before I introduce the speakers, I would like to kind of set the scene for our broader discussion on government policies. And I would like to briefly talk about two case studies of violence perpetrated by state actors as well as non-state actors through gender perspective. So the first case study that I would like to talk about is Yazidi women, which is my PhD topic, who is a religious minority and who were persecuted by the so-called Islamic State in 2014. So the Yazidi community is subjected to gender-based violence by the so-called Islamic State. And in many accounts during that period from 2014, even, 2019, the implications still continue. They murdered roughly more than 3,000 men first when they refused to convert to Islam. Then the group kidnapped more than 5,000 women and girls and displaced the entire population from their homeland in Kurdistan region of Iraq. So many Yazidi women and children, some of them fathered by the ISIS, live in internally displaced camps in the region, which represent the long-term implications of gender-based violence for this ethnic minority group. So moving on to the second case study that I would like to talk about, which is also more related to this panel, is women of Turkey. So gender and sexuality issues have long been topics of discussion in Turkey's fragile political context. So long before AKP, the Justice and Development Party came to power in 2002, women's bodies, sexualities, and their rights have always been objects of debate in Turkey's political history. So since the foundation of Turkish Republic, gendered and sexualities narratives were used by both the defenders of secular state ideology and the political Islam to position themselves in relation to these specific political events, such as coups in 1960s and 1980s. But more recently, though, the discourse of the current ruling party, although had excited many citizens from different political backgrounds, with the gender sensitive law, for example, with the amendment of the penal code in 2004, which in which the punishments for gender-based violence increased, and also with the Istanbul Convention, which was signed in 2012. Turkey passed laws that aim to prevent violence against women. These developments, were seen in the first place as progressive and as positive steps towards the elimination of violence against women. Nonetheless, the AKP made a U-turn and failed to address the gender-based inequality, discrimination based on sexual orientation, and at the end, withdrew from Istanbul Convention in 2021, this year. So with that, discourses and policies have taken an increasingly oppressive turn, and the AKP government grew increasingly authoritarian, and people of different ideological and political backgrounds have been subjected to different forms of systematic and social violence. So the gender and sexuality issues have been one of the areas in which this oppressive turn manifested itself with the growing levels of persecution and unjust incarceration of women in Turkey. So this is all from me. I'm going to now introduce our first speaker, who is Angel Dikme. She is an author and radio broadcaster. She has written articles in many different arts and politics magazines, including Nevros. She also authored the book Kimlik İstemem in Turkish. In English, it means I don't want an identity. With her son, Angel Dikme currently lives in Paris. So Angel is over to you. Angel Hanım, buyurun.
Peki. Merhaba. Parev, Slav, Kalimera, Shalom, Hello, Bonjour, Hay. Bildiğim, bilmediğim tüm dillerde yeryüzüne merhaba diyorum. Öncelikle davetiniz için teşekkür ediyorum. Bu paneli düzenleyenlere teşekkür ediyorum. Madem çeviriyle olacak bu, o zaman ben yazmıştım, okumayacağım. Daha kısaca neden buradayım söylediğimde sanıyorum çevirmesi bilmiyorum ne zaman, ne kadar, hangi cümleden sonra bekleyeyim çeviriyi, nasıl yapacağız? Ona göre susayım.
Bekleyin. Ben merhaba, teşekkürlerinizi ileteyim, tamam. So hello everyone, kalimera in many languages. I'll try to say hello in all the languages I know, and I'd like to thank all the organizers for having invited me. I had a written speech prepared, but I didn't know it was going to be consecutive interpretation, so now I'll make a summary.
Evet, sosyal medyada çok sıkça rastladığım bir cümle var. Geçmişi geçmişte bırakalım, bugüne bakalım, olan olmuş.
There is a sentence that I see often in social media. What's in the past remains in the past. Let's not look behind us. Let's look forward, and so on.
Fakat o geçmiş dediğimiz şeyin aslında hiçbir zaman geçmediğini, bugün hep burada olduğunu, bugün onu biraz anlatmak istiyorum. Neden? Bugün yaşadığımız hep bir adalet talebi var. Hala ülkeye baktığımda, zaten ülkeye baktığımda gördüklerimden dolayı buradayım. Şunu gördüm ki tekrar anlatmak zorundayım. Kitap yazdım, makaleler yazdım. 19 yıl radyo yaptım. Ben sandım ki gerçeği bir kere anlatınca herkese ulaşır. Ama öyle olmuyormuş.
But I'm here to tell you that the past does not remain in the past. The past is always with us. And in Turkey, we're still demanding justice. We're still looking for justice. I thought that once I told everyone about it, people would have understood, but it's not the case. I keep on having to repeat myself. I've been working as a broadcaster for the past 19 years, but nothing I say remains.
100 yıllık, 150 yıllık yalanların toplumu nasıl zehirlediğini izlediğim zaman, oturanların, bu egemenlerin, tiranların işleyişini gördüğüm zaman, ki bu Hitler'in, Propaganda Bakanı'nın, Göbel'in taktiğidir. Yalanı diyor kısacası şöyle teknik biliyorsunuz. Yalanı diyor birkaç kere, 100 kere tekrarlarsanız buna inanırlar. Ve Osmanlı'dan beri ülkemizde de yapılan bu ne yazık ki topluma.
I've been reading about how they've been poisoning our society for the past 150 years. I've been seeing how these authoritarian dictators have been behaving to us. They've been telling us all these lies. And it's as Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda, said, it was his tactic. If you repeat a lie, the people will believe. And that's exactly what's been happening since the Ottoman times.
Bu gerçeği gördüğümde çok naifmişsin Angel dedim. Yani bugüne kadar dediğim gibi yazınca, anlatınca bir kere bitecek sanıyorsun ama öyle değil. Ben bugün bu yüzden buradayım. Artık biliyorum ki gerçeğin savunucuları, gerçeğin anlatıcıları tekrar bizler de bunları anlatmak zorundayız. Bunu gördüm ve bugün bu nedenle tekrar buradayım. Tekrar kendi hikayemi anlatıp oradan yola çıkıp ülkenin neden bugün bu halde olduğunu sizlere anlatmaya çalışacağım.
And when I realized that this was a tactic that was being used against us, repeating the lies until we believed them, I realized I'd been so naive. I thought that once I'd written my books, once I'd explained myself, it would be understood, but it's not true. Those who tell the truth have to repeat the truth over and over again. And that's why I'm here today, to repeat my story, and from my story, tell you about what's happening in the country.
Benim baba tarafım Sasunlu. Kendim Diyarbakır doğumluyum. Anne tarafım Diyarbakırlı. Ülkede biliyorsunuz bu Ermenilere dair söylenen şey haindiler denir. isyan ettiler denir. Ha, isyan ettiler. Neden ettiler? Osmanlı'yı bırakın. Cumhuriyet döneminde, bakın Cumhuriyet döneminde benim ailemde kaçırılan, ben bugüne kadar 2 kadın olduğunu biliyordum. İkinci kitap çalışmamı yaparken kuzenlerle konuştuğumda 3. bir kadının daha olduğunu öğrendim. Ve bu kadın 3 çocuklu bir anneyken bir Kürt ağa tarafından kaçırılıyor ve karısı kaçırıldığı için kocası intihar ediyor. Cumhuriyet döneminde bakın. Düşünebiliyor musunuz? Gidip kocası adalet arayamıyor. Benim karımı kaçırdılar diyemiyor ve kendini öldürüyor.
So, on my mother's side, I'm from Diyarbakir, and on my father's side, I'm from Sassoon. And you know what they say about Armenians in Turkey? They say that Armenians are traitors, that they rebelled. Yes, but why did they rebel? I won't tell you about what had happened during Ottoman times, but even during the Turkish Republic, I know of 2 women in my family that were kidnapped. And while I was writing my book, I learned about a 3rd woman who had been kidnapped by a Kurdish aga. She had 3 children with her husband, and still she was kidnapped. And her husband could not seek justice, so he committed suicide.
Sonra ilk gece hakkı var. Bu da çok uygulanan belli bölgelerde. Mesela Sassun'da görüyoruz bunu, Zeytun'da görüyoruz bunu. Her yerde yok. Zaten ağanın, büyüklerimiz öyle derdi. Ağan derlerdi, zalimse kızım derlerdi. Çok zordu hayat. Ama merhametli bir ağaysa derlerdi. Gayet güzel yaşadık biz derlerdi mesela. Bakın bu ayrımı da yaparlardı. Yani ağanın tümüyle o bireysel, kişisel, zalimliğiyle doğru orantılı olarak da acıların çoğu yaşanmış.
And then there is the thing that's called the right to the first night. So a woman, when she's married on her first night, the aga has her first right to her. He has first claims over her. But people would also say, if you have a nice aga, then you can have a good life. But if he's cruel, then you will have a difficult life. So there was that distinction being made.
Bu ilk gece hakkı düğün olduğu zaman gelin önce ağanın yatağından geçiyor. Kural bu. Ben bunu geçenlerde bir Kürt arkadaşımla konuştum. Çünkü bunu okudukça, öğrendikçe, kadınlarla konuştukça bu çok anlatılan bir şey de değil. Kadınlar ancak sorarsanız bunu konuşuyorlar. Dedim ki Kürt arkadaşım, o da yazar kendisi. Bence dedim Kürt kadınları da buna maruz kalmıştır. Çünkü Kürt toplumunda da Kürt toplumu da ağanın kölesi gibiler. Ben eminim dedim bunu yaşayan Kürt kadınları da vardır. Yani Hristiyan olanlar değil, sadece Ermeni kadınları değil diye düşünüyorum dedim. Gitmiş bunu annesine sormuş. Annesi demiş ki demiş Ermeniler menamustur demiş. Nasıl böyle bir şeye izin veriyorlar? Dedim çok haklı. Ben de dedim şaşırmıştım ilk bunu öğrendiğimde. Nasıl böyle bir şeye izin verirler diye. Fakat işte okumalardan öğreniyoruz. O dönemin şartlarını daha sonradan öğreniyoruz tabii ki. Osmanlı'da Hristiyan tebaanın silah tutması yasak, silah bulundurması. At binmesi yasak. Ve düşünün mafyavari bir yapıyla, bir zorbalıkla kızı vermezlerse aileyi katlediyorlar. Yani bu kadınlar aileyi korumak için o tecavüze boyun eğiyorlar. Asırlarca. Düşünebiliyor musunuz?
So, as I said, the aga can lay claim on the bride on her first night. This was a tradition. And it happened to all the Armenian women. But I was wondering, didn't Kurdish women also have to submit to this tradition? And so I asked a Kurdish friend of mine who asked her mother, and she said, how could Armenian families allow this to happen to their daughters? They also give lots of value to their honor. But as you know, Armenians weren't allowed to ride a horse, they weren't allowed to have guns. So if they didn't allow the aga to lay claim to their daughters, then their families would be destroyed. So the women, they sacrificed themselves for the good of their families.
Ve özellikle beylere sormak istiyorum. Bu halka hain diyenler lütfen desinler, bugün düşünsünler ki yaşadıkları yerde valilik diyelim, belediye diyelim, başkanı diyelim, ne bileyim resmi birimler, kurumların belediye başkanıdır, işte muhtarı diyelim köydeki, dese ki evlenen düğünde karınız önce benim yatağımdan geçecek. Nasıl karşılarlar bunu? Hangisi buna evet der? Hayır dedikleri zaman onlara hain mi diyeceğiz, kahraman mı diyeceğiz? Bu soruyu kendilerine sormalarını istiyorum. Adalet çok önemli.
So I'd like the men who are listening to us tonight to think, to imagine, if an aga, if a muhtar, if a governor, wherever you're living, the person who has authority were to say, well, your wife, she's going to spend her first night with me, what would you do? Would you become a traitor, as we call the Armenians who said no? Would you become a traitor or would you be a hero? It's very important to seek justice. That's what I want to talk about today.
İkinci nokta isyan sebeplerinden biri de vergiler. Şimdi Hristiyan tebaa dininde kalmak için, inancında kalmak, bunu da yaşamak için ek bir vergi veriyordu Osmanlı'ya. Osmanlı zaten bir vergi alıyor. Düşünün, inancında kalmak için ikinci bir vergi veriyor. Bu yetmiyor, üstüne bir de bölgesindeki ağaların, Kürt ağalarına da vergi veriyorlar, haraç gibi. Çünkü vermezlerse yaşama imkanları yok, öldürülüyorlar yani. Ve asırlarca bu zulüm böyle diyorlar yeter. Yani düşünün bugün yaşadığınız ülkeye vergi veriyorsunuz. Bir de ikinci bir ülkeye daha vergi verdiğinizi düşünün bugün. Kim kabul eder? O dönemde asırlarca Ermeniler bu durumda yaşamışlar ve sonunda padişaha haberler yolluyorlar. Yeter diyorlar padişahım. Ya sana vergi verelim ya buraya vergi verelim. İki yere birden vergi. Çünkü şöyle bir şey de var. Yani Ermeniler zengin derler ya, o da büyük bir yalan. Ha, burjuvazisi vardı, oluşmuştu. Evet, fakat Ermeni halkı da bir köylü. Benim babam çobandı yani dağlarda. Bal üretirdi benim babamın ailesi. Asırlarca bal üretmişlerdir. Yaşadıkları bölgenin adı bile Hazarpetak, 1000 kovan koymuşlar. Balcılık yapıyorlar, hayvanları var, çiftçilik yapıyorlar falan bu insanlar.
Another reason for which the Armenians rebelled was because they had to pay too many taxes. First of all, they had to pay tax to the country in which they were living, be it the Ottoman Empire or the Turkish Republic. Second, they had to pay taxes to be able to keep their religion. And third, they had to pay a tax to the Kurdish aga. It was like a bribe. And then they actually told the Sultan, please, we want to pay either taxes to you or taxes to the region, to the aga. We can't pay taxes to both. You know, Armenians have this reputation of being rich, but actually they were all peasants. My ancestors were shepherds, they were beekeepers.
Bütün bunları neden anlatıyorum? Bugüne baktığımızda, ülkeye baktığımda gördüklerim inanın beni şaşırtmıyor. Çok üzülüyorum fakat hiç şaşırmıyorum. Geçmişe baktığınızda, geçmişte olanları bildiğiniz zaman bunun onun devamı olduğunu görüyorsunuz. Şayet o Ermeni kadınların çığlığı duyulsaydı, adalet o dönemde inşa edilseydi, bugün günde bilmem 3-4 tane kadın öldürülmeyecekti. Katilleri sokakta rahatça gezemeyecekti.
So when I see what's happening around us today, I'm not surprised. I am sad, but I'm not surprised. Because you know what, when you know what happened in the past, the fact that this is all continuing is just not surprising. If the screams of Armenian women had been heard in the past, if they had been able to seek justice, then women today would not be killed in the streets and their murderers would not go free.
İnsan haklarını konuşuyoruz bu akşam. Bütün arkadaşlar bir sürü başlıklar altında konuştular. Buradan baktığımda hep düşündüm, çünkü davetiniz geldiğinden beri de düşünüyorum, hep düşünüyorum. En büyük dedim insan hakları ihlali nedir? Kendi kendime sordum. Ve bu tiranların, devletlerin insanlara söylediği yalandan daha büyük bir suç, günah, hukuk ihlali, hak ihlali olduğunu düşünmüyorum. Bu yalanlarla, çünkü öylesine çürütüyorlar ki toplumları. Bu yalandan daha büyük bir suç ben göremiyorum şu anda. Çünkü bütün bu başlıklarda konuştuğumuz bütün bu başlıkların alt paydası bu yalan. Yalan, yalan, yalan.
So ever since I've been invited here, I've been thinking, what can I say about human rights? What is the greatest human rights abuse? And I think actually that there's no greater human rights abuse, no greater abuse against law than the lies that we are being told by the people who are reigning over us. They're destroying our communities, they're destroying our society, they're laying the foundations for all that is evil.
Ermenilerin o dönemden beri istedikleri şey eşitlik ve adalet. Sosyal hareketlilikte olsun, partilerinin tüzüklerini okuyun. Mesela ben şunu önerirdim bilmeyenlere, çok okumayı da sevmeyenlere, Zohrab'ın meclis konuşmalarını okusunlar. Neler konuşmuş, neler talep ediyorlar. Paramaz'ın asılmadan önce 20 tane solcu genç İstanbul'da Beyazıt Meydanı'nda asıldı. Paramaz'ın konuşmasını bulup okusunlar.
So all that Armenians have been asking for all these decades and centuries, it's just been equality and justice. You know, whether they're looking for social mobility, if you can read their party charters or their speeches that they made. It's always been about equality and justice. You know, 20 youngsters were killed from the left on Beyazıt Square in Istanbul. You should read what they said beforehand. You should read their speeches.
Yeni okumaya başladım. Saklı Tarihin İzinde diye Kadir Akın'ın yeni kitabı buradaydı. Aldım, okuyorum. Mesela oradan öğrendiğim bir şey. O dönemde hapishanelerde olanları öğreniyorum. Bugüne bakıyorum, değişen hiçbir şey yok. O kadar her şey geçmişte aynı devam ediyor ki. Bugün bakın, bugün Rabia Naz'ın babası adalet talep ettiği için deli muamelesi görüyor. Kızı öldürüldü ve rüşvetle kapattılar. Ve bakın Paramaz'ın bir sözü var. Sizin Türk adaletinizin adı rüşvet mi demiş. O zaman söylemiş bunu. Bugün okuduğumda yine gördüm, tazeledim bilgileri. Ve bugün Naz'ın babasının yaşadığı şeyi de görüyoruz. Ve bir sürü örnek var böyle, biliyorsunuz. Tek tek vaktinizi alıp oralara girmeyeceğim. Cumartesi anneleri 20 Mayıs 95'ten beri çocuklarının bedenlerini talep ediyorlar. Bütün bunlar adaletin 15'te öldürdüğümüz için sıkışıp kaldık bu sokakta. Sıkışıp kaldık bu çıkmaz sokakta, ne yazık ki. Mesela kulüp dizisiyle öğrendiğimiz sırf gayrimüslim oldukları için işten atılan, kovulan azınlık bireyleri için işleyen, onlar için o zaman bir adalet mekanizması olsaydı bugün belki yaşkarlar yaşanmayacaktı.
I've been reading books about the period, about the 60s, the 70s, and earlier, about all the past, and I see that everything is repeating itself. People whose daughters were killed and who were seeking justice had been told to be crazy. They were asked to give bribes, and when they refused to, they were attacked. And then the Saturday mothers, when we look at them, they've been clamoring for their sons' bodies since 1995 without any results. And now there's this well-known series on Netflix called The Club. And there too we see how people who weren't Muslim were kicked out of their jobs and they weren't able to seek justice. If they had been able to seek justice, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Buradan notlarımdan okumak istiyorum. İşte anlatmaya çalıştığım tüm bu nedenlerden dolayı geçmiş dediğimiz şey de bir yalan. Yalan çünkü bugünümüz orada yapılan yanlışlara, zulümlere sessiz kalmanın bedelini ödeyerek geçiyorsa aslında geçen hiçbir şey yok. Görmüyor musunuz?
I would like to continue reading from my notes, and I say that the past is actually a lie, because in the past we kept silent, and now we're paying for the cost.
O geçmişle, hatalarla yüzleşmeden eşit, adil bir toplum inşa edemeyeceğimizi görün artık. Lütfen görün artık. Ülkemiz başta olmak üzere yeryüzünde bir yalanlar bataklığında yaşamaya mahkum edilmek istemiyoruz. Sözümü bitirirken bir tek soru sormak istiyorum.
Please realize that unless we confront our past, unless we confront the lies that we're being told, we'll never be able to live in an equal society, in a peaceful society. We don't want to keep living in a swamp of lies.
Çocuklarınıza, torunlarınıza, egemenlerin vatan, din adına sarf ettikleri yalan argümanlarla birer köle olarak yaşayacakları bir dünya mı bırakmak istiyorsunuz? Yoksa bir yerde zulüm varsa direniş haktır. Bir yerde isyan varsa demek ki orada zulüm var evladım. Sen ol, zalimin yanında durma. Emeğin, ezilenin, direnenin yanında dur ki eşit, özgür, adil bir dünyada yaşayacaksınız. Adalet, eşitlik herkesin hakkı. İnsan onurunu korumanın vakti sizce gelmedi mi diyor.
I'd like to call upon all of you. If you want your children, your grandchildren to live in peace, where there's justice, then do you want them to become slaves who live to perpetuate the lies told in the name of nation, in the name of religion? If in one place there is cruelty, then we have to rebel against it. That's our right. You be yourself. Don't be next to cruelty. Don't be next to the oppressors. Always be on the side of those who are rebelling, of those who are resisting, of those who are being oppressed. That's the only way that we'll be able to live in a land of equality and justice.
Birlikte hareket etmenin vakti gelmedi mi diyorum ve özellikle yine kadınlara sesleniyorum.
And I'm calling upon women especially. Is it not time to move in solidarity, to come together?
Teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you.
Yeah, Angel, thank you so much. What you have been telling is really touching, and also, I mean, you really clearly explained the lived experiences of, women of different ethnicities and backgrounds, not only Armenian women, but also the, Kurdish women. And you rightly said that, we need to tell what happened to women over and over again with the hope that perpetrators will be brought to justice. Thank you so much again. I am now moving on to our second speaker, who is David Phillips. David Phillips is currently director of the program on peace building and rights at Columbia University's Institute for the Study of Human Rights. Phillips has served as foreign affairs expert and as senior advisor to the US Department of State and as senior advisor to the United Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Phillips has been a senior fellow at Harvard University's Future of Diplomacy Project and fellow at Harvard University's Center for Middle East Studies. He was deputy director of the Center for Preventive Action at the Council on Foreign Relations, senior fellow at the Preventive Diplomacy Program of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and project director at the International Peace Research Institute of Oslo. He has also been a president of the Congressional Human Rights Foundation and executive director of the Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity. He is author of Liberating Kosovo, Coercive Diplomacy and US Intervention, also Diplomatic History and the Turkey-Armenia Protocols, From Bullets to Bullets, Violent Muslim Movement in Transition, which I think I will get this book, Losing Iraq Inside the Post-War Reconstruction Fiasco, Unsilencing the Past, Track 2 Diplomacy and Turkish-Armenia Reconciliation. He has written many policy reports and hundreds of articles in leading publications, such as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, International Herald Tribune, and Foreign Affairs. David Phillips, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to join the conference.
Thanks for joining us.
Over the course of these panels, we've heard extensive information about the extent to which human rights has been deteriorating in Turkey, also backsliding on democracy. It should be noted that President Biden has convened a summit of democracy with representatives from more than 100 countries, but that Turkey was not invited to attend. As the domestic conditions in Turkey have worsened, Turkey under Tayyip Erdogan has become increasingly aggressive, fomenting conflict on its borders and pursuing a confrontational relationship with frontline states. Let's put a little bit of historical perspective on the deteriorating conditions in Turkey, as well as the region. US officials often talk about restoring democracy in Turkey. We should be frank that under Kemalist rule, Turkey was never a democracy. Its abuse of Kurds and Christian minorities, including the genocide of Armenians, dates back to the waning years of the Ottoman Empire and the founding of the Republic of Turkey. Turkey's secular parties became atrophied, which worsened conditions for democracy in the country. So US officials initially welcomed the AKP's rise in 2002. They hoped that it would bring democracy, but as we've seen, this is wishful thinking. Erdogan was never a quote, Democrat or secular. In 1998, he gave a speech in Siirt. He said, the mosques are our barracks, the domes are helmets, the minarets are bayonets, and the faithful are soldiers. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison and served several months in jail for using religion to foment divisions. After the AKP won elections in 2002, Erdogan smugly pronounced, democracy is like a streetcar. You get off when you've reached your destination. US-Turkey relations have been deteriorating ever since. This deterioration accelerated with the crackdown of protesters in Gezi Park in May of 2013, who were demonstrating in favor of environmental protection. Police brutality spread from Istanbul to 60 cities across Turkey. Concerns in Washington intensified regarding freedom of expression. Article 8 of the Anti-Terror Act and Article 301 of the Penal Code are used by Erdogan's administration to restrict freedom of expression. Article 301 makes it a crime to, quote, denigrate Turkishness. Turkey's Islamism, led by the AKP and Erdogan personally, brought it into complicity with ISIS in 2014. And this conspiracy of cooperation became a major concern in the region and for the US. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton lamented Turkey's, quote, new, more serious Islamic reality. She decried support by Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis for Turkey. US officials also condemned Turkey's ties to jihadi organizations, including ISIS. During a speech at Harvard University on October 3, 2014, then Vice President Biden said, our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. The Turks were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a Sunni Shiite proxy war, they poured hundreds of millions of dollars, thousands of tons of weapons to anyone who would fight against Assad. Erdogan admitted, you are right, we let too many of them through. I'm going to focus my remarks going forward on the situation in Syria and Turkey's role, which has also led to grave human rights violations of all peoples in Syria, Arabs, Alawites, Kurds, Armenians, Assyrians, and other Christians. 40,000 foreign fighters from 80 countries made their way through Turkey along the jihadi highway to the front line in Syria. Their engagement was facilitated by Turkey's National Intelligence Agency. It was systematic and deliberate. The jihadi highway ran from Sanliurfa to Raqqa. Relations between the US and Turkey deteriorated further when Erdogan accused the US of complicity in the coup of July 15, 2016. The exact numbers are unclear, but tens of thousands were arrested and 150,000 dismissed from their jobs. Erdogan accused Fethullah Gulen of organizing the coup. Frankly, I've never met Mr. Gulen. I don't know anything about his alleged role in the coup. I do know that Gulen and Erdogan were partners, and the Gulen movement is undemocratic and hostile to human rights, as is the AKP. For the record, I have no favor or ties to the Gulen movement. I do stand, however, with the people of Turkey whose rights have been systematically denied by the AKP. US officials criticized Turkey for adopting its new constitution on April 16, 2017, which transformed its parliamentary system into a presidential one. The Venice Commission said it was a dangerous step backwards, putting Turkey on the path to authoritarianism. Security cooperation between the US and Turkey also suffered as a result of Erdogan's decision to acquire S-400 missiles from Russia at a cost of $2.5 billion. As a member of NATO, there is a principle of interoperability. The US offered surface-to-air missiles, which Turkey rejected. As a result of the decision to acquire sophisticated S-400 system from Russia, the US made a decision to exclude Turkey from the F-35 stealth bomber weapon system. Also, sanctions have been brought to bear against Turkey under CATSA, legislation adopted by the US Congress, countering American adversaries through Sanctions Act. International diplomacy to end the war in Syria relied on UN involvement. However, US-Turkey relations deteriorated further when Turkey joined the Astana process, an alternative to UN mediation that also involved Russia and Iran as co-chairs. No issue, however, has polarized US-Turkey relations more than US security cooperation with Kurds in Syria and Iraq. The Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, led by General Muslim Kobani, includes at its core Syrian Kurds. Though 40% of PKK members come from Syria, Syrian Kurdish groups are operationally distinct from the PKK. In Erdogan's mind, they are one and the same, and his chauvinism and racism towards Kurds is apparent. For Erdogan, the only good Kurd is a dead Kurd. Rojava, a region in north and east Syria where Kurds predominate, is a model of grassroots democracy, women's empowerment, and environmental sustainability, inspired by Abdullah Öcalan's views on democratic federalism. The US, despite its shared values with Kurds in north and east Syria, failed to support them effectively. Kobani is a small city in Syria on the border with Turkey. The Battle of Kobani, which was attacked in September 2014, was a turning point in the war. ISIS was supplied by Turkey and launched attacks from the hills of Suruj. Their collusion was well documented by Cumhuriyet. John Dunder, the editor-in-chief, was jailed for revealing state secrets. Initially, US officials, including ex-ambassador Ryan Crocker, believed we don't have a dog in this fight. But the prospect of Kobani's heroic defenders, including members of the YPJ, women fighters, being beheaded, compelled the US to take action. It airlifted weapons and medical supplies, enabling Kurdish forces to push ISIS out of Kobani after 4 months of intense house-to-house fighting. For the Pentagon, Kurds proved their mettle and battlefield readiness in Kobani. The US needed boots on the ground to fight ISIS and supported the YPG with weapons and air power as the YPG pivoted east, attacking Tal Abyad on the Turkey-Syria border. In August of 2016, the SDF ousted the Free Syrian Army from Manbij, and in May of 2017, the SDF captured Raqqa. 6,000 ISIS fighters were killed in brutal hand-to-hand fighting. US support for the Kurds was, however, tactical. While supporting Kurds on the battlefield, the US acceded to Turkey's demand and barred Kurds in the PYD, the Democratic Union Party, from attending diplomatic meetings in Geneva unless they join the delegation of the Syrian Opposition Council. Salih Muslim, who was the PYD co-chair, applied for a US visa at the embassy in Stockholm, presenting a letter of invitation from Columbia University, but he received no reply. During these years, the SDF evolved as the point of the spear fighting ISIS. Erdogan was outraged when Secretary of State Rex Tillerson announced a border security force, including 40,000 YPG members, to guard against incursions by ISIS from Turkey. Erdogan threatened to, quote, strangle the baby before it was born. President Trump held a conversation with Erdogan in December of 2017. During the conversation, much to the shock and surprise of his advisors, he told Erdogan that the US would withdraw. In response to this, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis and Special Envoy Brett McGurk resigned. In January 20th of 2018, Turkey launched cross-border operations targeting Afrin. I interviewed some survivors of Afrin during my trip to Qamishli, and I met a woman who described a horrible incident. She and her daughter were fleeing the city when a missile hit the girl, who was blown to bits. The mother was left holding the girl's arm, all that was left of the child. Turkey established so-called safe zones in northern Syria, purging the area of Kurdish civilians and compelling the SDF's withdrawal. This practice of ethnic cleansing is ongoing. In September of 2019, Erdogan announced that 3 million refugees would return to the de-escalation zone on the Syrian side of the border. Forced repatriation violates international norms requiring safe, orderly, and dignified return. But as we've seen with Turkey's treatment of migrants fleeing battlefields in the Middle East, its adherence to international humanitarian law leaves much to be desired. The US launched a constitutional committee in June of 2018. As I heard from Geir Pedersen, special envoy for the Syrian conflict, Turkey unabashedly took steps to influence the selection of its members and its agenda. On October 6th of 2019, Trump and Erdogan held another phone call. Trump announced America's retreat from North and East Syria. Erdogan didn't wait this time. On the 9th, Turkey invaded, occupying the area between Tal Abyad and Ras Al Ain, which Kurds refer to as Serikaniye. In December of 2019, Trump announced that 2,000 US special forces who were left behind would leave Syria. Later, he backtracked, saying that at least 400 would remain to prevent the resurgence of ISIS and to safeguard the oil fields. Senator Mitt Romney said that the US betrayal of the SDF is a bloodstain on America's reputation. Trump abandoned the SDF, America's best and only friends in Syria. At the behest of America, the SDF lost 11,000 people killed and 23,000 seriously injured, fighting ISIS at our request. After America's recent ignominious retreat from Afghanistan, Syrian Kurds feared that the Biden administration would cut and run, leaving them to reprisals by Turkey and other jihadist forces. Ilham Ahmed, the president of the executive committee of the SDC, met US officials in late September 2021 to discuss continued cooperation between US special forces and the YPG and YPJ. She was assured that the US deployment in Syria would continue in order to destroy the Islamic State, rebuild infrastructure, and remain a player in pursuit of a political solution. Biden issued Executive Order 13894, indicating that the US would stay involved. US officials always told me faced with a decision between Turkey and the Kurds, the US would always choose Turkey. Is this still the case? I think that US diplomats are focusing more on advancing the interests of its friends and allies and less on placating its adversary. Clearly, both domestically and internationally, Turkey has gone rogue. Steely-eyed realism is needed to see Turkey as it is, not how it may have been or we wish it to be. Turkey often requests special consideration as a NATO member. Let me be crystal clear. If Turkey applied to join NATO today, because it is Islamist, hostile to human rights, and anti-American, its application wouldn't even be considered. The US needs to take a deep breath, evaluate US-Turkey relations, and adjust its course. It is a mistake to see Turkey as a friend and ally when it is so hostile to the values that the West and the United States holds dear, values of human rights and democracy and loyalty. Thank you all very much. Pleased to be a part of today's conference.
Thank you so much, Phillips. Thank you also for providing an important insights into Turkey's foreign as well as Turkey's foreign policy as well as the U.S. approach to Turkey, and also you clearly explain the differences between the theory and practice. The discourses that the Erdogan use and the practice that they are actually doing. Thank you so much. Now, by the way, I've forgotten to mention in the beginning, but we are gonna do Q&A at the end of all talks. So so you can write your questions, on the chat box, or so that I can ask your questions on your behalf. So I am now gonna introduce our next speaker, who is Meltem Arikan. Meltem Arikan, she's a Turkish and Welsh author. Arikan is known for her sharp critique of society and fearless and outspoken voice in her novels, plays, poems, and articles. Arikan has written 11 books, including 9 novels and 5 plays. Her 4th novel, Yeter Tenimi Acıtmayın, in English, Stop Hurting My Flesh, was banned in early 2004 by the Committee to Protect Minors from Obscene Publications. The ban was lifted after the fight, and Arikan has been awarded with Freedom of Thought and Speech Award 2004 by the Turkish Publishers Association. She has received several awards and was shortlisted for the Freedom of Expression Award in 2014 by the Index on Censorship for her play Me Minor, which the Turkish authorities claimed that it was a rehearsal for the Gezi Park demonstrations in 2013. Their subsequent hate campaign, fueled by state-sponsored media, forced her to leave Turkey and to start living in Wales. In 2019, Turkish court accepts Gezi indictments, seeking life sentences for 16 people, including her. Over to you, Meltem. You're muted.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me here. I am a woman kicked out of heaven. I am a writer, tried for terrorism, facing life in prison. I am an exile, defined as other. I am autistic, pushing myself to be normal, only to become invisible. Everything started in 2004, when government banned my 4th book, Stop Hurting My Flesh. When they banned my novel, I felt so furious, pure fury. After that, I started a lot of campaign. Before my book, if you said the word incest on TV, you would be fined. But the act of incest itself was not punished at all. And you couldn't open a case on incest because there was no law against incest. So my campaign contributed to the world being accepted, and the law has changed due to these campaigns. Later, I was awarded the Freedom of Thought and Speech Award by the Turkish Publisher Association. Then I understood that people are actually comfortable with the way things are. And then when I try to talk about something uncomfortable, people think that I am paranoid or exaggerating. So I stopped and I start focus on the world as a whole through social media. For 2 years in social media around the time WikiLeaks, Arab revolutions and Occupy movement, I felt received and perceived what was happening worldwide. I witnessed how social media gave a platform for people to share their personal stories or provide information by using Twitter, broadcasting with the mobile phones using Ustream, live stream when traditional media was silent. I realized that interactions on social media happen regardless of the border of distance, languages, nations, religions, or ideologies, which inspired me to create a play. It was all about the situations and events happening all around the world. Me Minor was a play that was set in a country called Pinima, Freedom in a Box, Democracy. During the play, the audience could choose to play the president democracy game or support the pianist rebellion against the system. Me Minor was staged as a play where an actual and social media-oriented RPG was integrated with the actual performance. So it was the first play of its kind in the world. On 10th of June, the pro-government newspaper Yeni Şafak came out with the headline, "What a coincidence," accusing Me Minor as being rehearsal for the protest 6 months in advance. The subheadline said that new information has come to the light to show that the Gezi Park protests were an attempt civil coup, and continue claim that the protests were rehearsed months before in the play called Me Minor, staged in Istanbul. After Yeni Şafak headline, the mayor of Ankara, Melih Gökçek, started to make programs on TV, especially about Me Minor, also mentioning my name. Once the premise of the conspiracy was established, any figure of somehow participated in the protest would always be linked to it, and thus to the foreign governments. On one of his programs, the mayor of Ankara claimed without any proof that Me Minor was funded from abroad. On various TV programs, website and online forums, Me Minor and my name were being linked to secret international powers. Me Minor is an absurd play, and it is too worrying to see how absurdity can be accused of being responsible for the reality of what happened in Gezi Park. And the most interestingly worrying is that these accusations are still ongoing. In 2019, Turkish court accepted Gezi incident seeking life sentences for 16 people, including me. I wrote an absurd play, and now my life has become more absurd than my play. To be honest, even now, I don't want to remember what I went through during those days. I was extremely distressed. I was receiving hundreds of threats and accusations almost every minute via social media. The accusations were carried on the TV. Me Minor being discussed on various TV channels at least twice a week. I wasn't just worried for myself, but also for the people who I love. Sadly, this was just the beginning for me. I saw that one of the many programs on Me Minor was now focusing on me. They were showing an edited version of one of my speech that I made 20 years ago about secularism. It was edited in such a way that I came across as an anti-Muslim agitator. Religion has always been one of the most sensitive subjects in Turkey. What upset me most was the fear I witnessed in my son's eye and the anxiety that my partner was living through. On YouTube, every day different users upload the video made about me, which was presented by the mayor of Ankara on his son's TV channel. Discussions and comments about me started to be made on digital forums and blogs during his campaign. Referring to the banning of my book in 2004, I received life-threatening emails and tweets as a result of this campaign. I start to get really angry because as a woman writer supporting secularism, I have been pointed to as a threat to Islamic faith and destructor of the Turkish family order over and over on TV and social media. Such accusations against any woman is a threat to her life, as you know. However, I was never frightened of losing my own life. I still stand for everything what I said. My fear was firstly for the security of my son and the people I love. I find it dreadful for a politician to able to play with people's lives so easily. I don't know what his political motive was, but I do know very well that these motivations do not include any humanitarian sensibility or responsibility. I am guilty. As a woman writer, for years, I have been rejecting the male-dominated system, and for the last couple of years, I have been trying to understand and express what is happening during the transitional period from the analog world to the digital world. I confess, using my intellectual and my imagination, I wrote a play called Me Minor. My play was performed 23 times in 3 different venues with the permission of the governorship of Istanbul for each venue. My imagination fails me when I try to understand those who accuse us of rehearsing the Gezi Park events before it has started, provoking all that is currently happening in our country, linking us to various foreign organizations and part of fantastical conspiracy theory relating to all these lies, even though they haven't seen our play. I am guilty. I know that for thousands of years, the culture of fear has been creating the other through the race and religious differences, and has been making up rational reasons for wars by imposing hate and violence. I say enough to the analog world order imposed by the male-dominated system based on the culture of fear, which is the one and only common culture of all societies in the world, and which has been forced upon all societies for thousands of years. I am guilty. I believe in freedom of thought and freedom of expression by getting away from the pressures of all ideologies, political statements, military, of civilian cops. I confess, I want to think and live freely by moving away from the thought patterns that have been imposed by the patriarchal system for thousands of years. I am guilty. I know that the only reason of running away from reality, deflecting reality, creating the other is fear. I confess, I will not be frightened and to become the other. For 3 nightmares months, I was trapped in my home in Turkey. One day, I saw that one of my prominent accuser was tweeting about me for 4 hours. The selected sentences he chose to tweet about were all excerpts from my research publication called The Body Knows, taken out of context and manipulating what I've written. Those tweets were the last straw. In 2013, I left my house with one luggage, my loved ones, my past, everything just behind. I left in a night with a single suitcase and came to Wales. Oscar Wilde says, life imitated art far more than art imitated life. He could be right. Back then, as a woman writer, I tried to understand the transition period from the analog to the digital world, and I wrote many articles about this subject. After writing articles about this transition period to the digital world, I decided to write a play to convey my vision to society as well. Today, I am seeing how one after the other, my prediction in my articles and in my play are coming to life. So my question that I would like to see debate, would you be potentially guilty if you can foresee what could happen in the world? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Meltem. It was great. It's really good to see that you're critiquing by, writing your play. It's really, I think it's a really noble approach. Really, congratulations. It's so good. So I'm now introduce our last speaker. Okay, please bear with me. Okay, our last speaker is Despina Syrri. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Your surname is Syrri, right? Okay, thanks. She's the founder of Symbiosis School of Political Studies in Greece, affiliated to the Council of Europe network of schools. She served as education specialist at the UNICEF Refugee and Migrant Response in Greece, and also advisor to the Regional Cooperation Council Political Department in Sarajevo. She's a senior expert she was a senior expert on the Roma Integration 2020 in Belgrade. She has been a visiting fellow at the Amsterdam Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. She has been also a director of research and international cooperation at the Immigration Policy Institute in Greece and worked amongst others with Reuters and Athens News. Also the Berlin Migration Network, Oxford Refugee Studies Center, and British Council on issues of post-conflict development, migration, refugees, borders, and the integration of the Western Balkans to the European Union. She has cooperated with the OSCE and ODHIR, Council of Europe, EU Fundamental Rights Agency. Syrri taught political science and political anthropology at the American College of Thessaloniki. She has published journal articles and book chapters in Greek, South Slavic, and English, and authored research papers and documentaries. Over to you, Despina. And you are muted. Yeah. Yes.
That's better. Thank you, Uzra. And thanks to the organizers for the honor of being here with you, but also for including me in this panel where I feel so much at home. Because primarily, I'm the granddaughter of people that come from Sinop, from Tekirdağ, from Foça, and from Istanbul. So yeah, I am at home. And I'm going to speak to you about refugees on this side, on the other side of the Aegean. Of course, the refugee crisis, as we are all very well aware, is far from over. The summer events in Afghanistan, as well as the dramatic developments in other parts of the world that do not receive the same public attention, such as Yemen and Ethiopia, constantly endanger the lives and freedom of more people every day. These people need and are entitled to international protection, as all nations have jointly decided during the Convention of Geneva after the painful experience of World War II. This fundamental human right should not be compromised or doubted. European countries cannot and should not deny their share of responsibility for the protection of refugees. The shift of responsibility towards other countries in exchange for financial support increases global inequalities and is morally dubious. At the same time, it exposes refugees to danger of ill treatment or places them in a state of limited protection. It is true that the refugee population in Greece, as compared to what happened in 2015, when over 1 million people crossed the Aegean and moved from Greece through the Balkans, going to Germany and Sweden. So now the refugee population has been significantly reduced since 2016. Indeed, thousands of people have been moved to the mainland, and some have left to other European countries. Nevertheless, there are women, men, and children who never made it to Greece. Reports of serious violations of human rights taking place across European borders to the extent of pushing people back to Turkey have been corroborated by international organizations. This systematic practice endangers the life of people, including young children, that often end up abandoned in the middle of the sea. This illegal practice must end, and an independent border monitoring mechanism that will investigate these events should be established. A portion of the population currently residing in Greece will remain in the country, so the Greek state has a duty to start processing a plan for their integration. Furthermore, in the concept of sharing responsibilities, it is imminent for the European Union to introduce a mandatory relocation plan, similar to the one applied during 2015-17. As I mentioned before, both the number of people arriving in Greece and the number of asylum seekers living on the Greek islands have fallen sharply in the last year. Fewer than 2,500 people have reached Greece by sea so far in 2021, compared to 60,000 in the same period in 2019. The Aegean Islands have gone from hosting about 2,500 people in August 2020 to 5,260 people in August 2021. Nevertheless, conditions have not improved for many vulnerable people seeking safety in Europe, who still face significant and persistent barriers, from access to the territory to a fair asylum procedure to dignified reception and integration in Greece. In September, the new EU-funded multi-purpose reception and identification center was inaugurated on the island of Samos. It is the first of 5 centers to be opened across the Greek islands and is considered a potential model for future facilities across Europe. Horrendous. The new model, designed to keep refugees out of sight and out of mind, sees asylum seekers and refugees housed in prison-like centers in remote areas. It creates an environment that strips people of their agency, decimates their mental health, and prevents them from interacting with and integrating into local communities. Authorities are also building walls around camps on the mainland to similar effect. In our experience, remaining for an extended period of time in confined facilities deprives our fellow human beings of their fundamental rights and hinders their integration, which is negatively impacting on their daily lives and causing them severe emotional distress. To us, their integration to a future hosting community is a process that should begin on day one. Isolation under inhuman conditions leads to insufficient health support and, even worse, leaves children deprived of proper education. In reality, living under such circumstances sadly mirrors a state of imprisonment. Adding to this state is the strict confinement of the asylum seekers that live in this facility. These centers, which are exclusively funded by the European Union, should be fully reformed and their philosophy shifted so that they can build a functioning relationship between the residents and the hosting community, thus aiding a smoother process of integration. At the same time, the fundamental human rights of asylum seekers should be protected, including access to healthcare and education. Above all, people should not be deprived of their freedom and dignity. Reports from multiple sources have recorded serious allegations of authorities conducting pushbacks at Greek borders since March 2020. As UNHCR, the European Commission, the Council of Europe, and others have stressed, these violations of international law and human rights, which have subjected individuals to mistreatment and violence, must be urgently investigated by an independent body if the rule of law is to be upheld in Europe. The European Commission recently announced that Greece's establishment of a mechanism to monitor human rights abuses at its borders is a precondition for the release of an additional 15.83 million of EU funding for Greece. Refusing migrants and refugees entry into a country's territory while pushing them back to countries where they face refoulement without lodging and examining an asylum claim has become the regular modus operandi, both at the external and internal borders of the European Union. The Greek authorities in particular have been repeatedly urged to investigate the accusations, while Amnesty International described as the country's de facto policy of border management. So even EU Home Affairs Commissioner Ylva Johansson has acknowledged that the findings are credible, shocking, and unacceptable, and has called for a national investigation. Frontex too. Actually, a Frontex interpreter has been pushed back to Turkey. This echoes long-standing calls by the European Parliament. So, a proposal for this new mechanism of border investigation is part of the new pact on migration and asylum, but all states have urged to establish these already by in their national legislation while negotiations progress. So it is a game of stalling. At the same time, serious and persistent gaps in the Greek government's management of the refugee response exist throughout the country. Unfortunately, in very basic things like food. For example, in October, authorities did not distribute expected cash allowances following the government's takeover of the accommodation in cities program from UNHCR. The guardianship program for children, unaccompanied minors, adopted in 2018 has not been implemented yet, while the interim one has been interrupted, leaving hundreds of children without effective representation. Access to education and health remain patchy. So, for nearly 3 months now, up to 60% of the current residents of the Greek refugee camps, or the refugee camps in Greece, on the mainland, have not had access to sufficient food. Following the implementation in October 2021 of a law passed last year, the Greek government stopped providing services to those whose asylum applications have been accepted. 1 in 4 residents in these facilities are women, and 2 in 5 are children. In addition, approximately 35,000 asylum seekers have gone for 3 months without any cash assistance and no, of course, jobs that had previously enabled them to buy food, clothing, and other essential items. Therefore, I would like to conclude by saying that turning a blind eye to the situation, ignoring that the law adopted by the competent organs and as interpreted by the courts is systematically violating, legitimizing extra-legal actions and policies far from legal requirements and actions is lethal. The fundamental requirements of the rule of law is that the authorities and institutions are bound by the law and court judgments, legally and politically. This is the biggest challenge in a democratic society. Thank you, Buzet.
Thank you so much, Despina. Thanks so much bringing these issues up indeed, because there are a lot to do, for the refugees to, address their needs. Thank you so much. So now we are going to move on to a Q&A session. Since we are running, out of time, I'm going to ask 2 questions. One of the question is a question for all, but I'm going to translate this question into Turkish as well for Angel. So let me ask this question in English first, then I'm going to ask in Turkish. The question is, as the biggest challenge in Turkey, how can polarization be overcome, and how could a unity for the fight against the oppressive regime be maintained among the people of Turkey? In Turkish now. Angel Hanım, soruyu sizin için Türkçe'ye çeviriyorum. Türkiye'nin en büyük problemi kutuplaşma ve bu kutuplaşmayla mücadele için ve insanların bu hani kısıtlayıcı rejimle savaşların mücadelelerinde bir araya gelmeleri için ve bunu devam ettirebilmeleri için neler yapılabilir? Buna nasıl baş edilebilir? Kutuplaşmayla nasıl baş edebiliriz? Nasıl önleyebiliriz? Yes, if you would like to share your thoughts, it would be great.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sure. As the biggest challenge in Turkey, how can polarization be overcome, and how could a unity for the fight against the oppressive regime be maintained among the people of Turkey? How can polarization be overcome? And people can be united to fight against the oppressive regime.
I can give the answer first if you want.
Yes, please.
Okay. You know what I believe? We are not listening each other, and we are not try to understand each other. And if we try to listen each other, and if we understand each other and not judge, to just find a solution together, things will change. But first, if you want to change something, what I believe, we have to change first ourselves. I came from Turkey, and when I was Turkey, a lot of people for me was other. I even don't want to listen them. I even don't want to understand them, because I have a lot of judgmental thought about it.
Yeah,
and now when I'm looking back, I understand how actually government control people. When everybody became other each other, and it is easy to control. So my solution, we have to find a way to listen each other, understand each other, and not judge each other.
Yeah, thank you so much. Couldn't agree more. Would anyone else also? Yes, David, please.
Sure, I'll add something to that, please.
Mm-hmm.
The dialogue is important in order to overcome the divisions that exist in society. But it's quite clear that Turkey is not going to advance socially or democratically under its current leadership. Regime change is something that needs to come from within the country.
Mm-hmm.
Turks themselves need to organize politically to oppose the current government. As we've seen elsewhere, intervention by the US to advance the goal of regime change often backfires.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to identify partners, work through civil society, strengthen their role as listeners, as dialogue partners. The US can play an active role, but it should do so discreetly.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, Turkey's future relies with Turkish citizens themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, David. That's all, I think. Okay, so Angel, would you like to say something? I feel like, no? Okay. You are muted, but from your facial expression, okay. I have one more question, and the last question. This is for Despina. Despina, the question is, what's your suggestion to urge, this is from the audience.
Özür dilerim, mikrofonum kapalıymış. Burada ben konuşuyorum. Söz alabilir miyim diye ama.
Çok özür diliyorum, buyurun.
Rica ederim, ben özür diliyorum. Mikrofonum kapalı kalmış. Ben de diyorum, ne oluyor? Şimdi kutuplaşma diyoruz ya. Her zaman insanı baz alarak.
Angela Hanım, dear interpreter, are you here?
Yes, the interpreter is here. Tercüman burada.
Okay,
Tamam.
thank you. Angela Hanım, buyurun.
Bu arada tercümana teşekkür ediyorum. Bana çok iyi yorumlar geldi. Özelden aradılar az önce. İnanılmaz çevirdi dediler. Duygularımı dedim çevirdi mi çok iyiydi dediler. Bunu da ileteyim kendisine, teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi kutuplaşma neden olur? Hep biri baz alarak düşünüyorum. İnsan olarak bütün soyut kimliklerimizden soyunmayı bir becersek, o bize dayatılan soyut kimlikler. O yüzden kitabıma kimlik istemem adını vermiştim. O kimlik dediğimiz şey çok acı veren bir şey. Neyse, o ayrı bir konu, oraya girmeyelim. Şimdi Bununla nasıl baş edeceğiz? Şöyle düşünmenizi istiyorum. İnsanların bütün bu kimliklerden soyunup, düşünün şimdi bir evladını kaybeden bir anne baba. Dünyanın herhangi bir yerinde. Bunun ırkı, dini falan yok. Ağladığı zaman acısı aynı, gözyaşının rengi yok. Bu belki söyleniyor, şiirlerde her yerde duyuyoruz. Fakat bu söz gerçekten gerçekliğimiz budur. Bunu görmemiz gerek. Gözyaşının rengi yok bir anne babanın o acısı. Her yerde aynı. Bir kadın dünyanın pardon canım benim çevirecek.
So why are we talking about polarization? Why are we so polarized? You know, I wrote a book that is called I Don't Want Identity, because I believe that human beings should be able to undress themselves of all these abstract identities, because identity gives pain. So how are we going to deal with polarization? As I said, we have to undo ourselves of our identities. A mother or a father who's lost their child has no religion or ethnicity. They're only human beings who are suffering. Tears have no color. This is the truth.
Tecavüze uğrayan kadın, düşünün dünyanın herhangi bir yerinde. Travma aynıdır, acı aynıdır, kayıp aynıdır, şiddet aynıdır. Bu kadının dini, ırkı ne olursa olsun, rengi ne olursa olsun bu acı aynı acıdır. Aynı şiddettir, aynı zulümdür.
If you imagine a woman who's been raped anywhere in the world, these women will share the same trauma. They've seen the same violence. They'll feel the same loss. This pain knows no religion, ethnicity, or color. Pain knows no color.
Yıllarca yazıp çizerken yazılarımda olsun, radyoda konuşurken 19 yıl boyunca tek derdim vardı. Acılarımı anlatırken yaşadıklarımı. Başkaları yaşamasın bunu. Diğer halklar bunu yaşamasın. Bütün çabam buydu. Fakat ne yazık ki bugün görüyorum. Ben çocukken mesela sadece biz işte gavurlar vardı. Bir de Müslüman Türkler dediğimiz öyleydi o zaman. Günümüzde bakın Müslüman Türk dediğimiz kesim, kendini adlandıran, o sınıfta görenler 1000 parça bugün.
For 19 years over the radio, when I was broadcasting, I tried to tell people about my pain, and my only aim was that so they wouldn't have to experience such pain. But today, when I look around myself, I see such polarization. When I was a child, there were only Muslims and those who were gavur, non-Muslims. But today, when you look at the Muslims in Turkey, you see that they've been split into 1,000 different parties.
Neden kutuplaşma? Çünkü bütün bu anlattığım acılar, adaletsizlikler insana dair. Ne yapıyoruz da bunu devlet yapıyor. O kadar güzel işliyor, o kadar kurnazca işliyor ki Abdülhamit'ten beri yeni değil bu. Çok kurnazca işliyorlar. Ötekileştiriyor sizi. O gavur diyor mesela Türk toplumunda Osmanlı'da biliyorsunuz Müslüman tebaa var, Hristiyan tebaa var. Bir gavur korkusu yaratılmıştır. Suni bir korku. Ne yazık ki daha sonraki yıllarda komünist bunlar dediler. Ötekileştirdiler. Kürtler malum yaşadıkları hepimizin malumu bugüne kadar hala yaşıyorlar. Aleviler zaten tarih boyunca hep bir ötekileştirme, hep bir ötekileştirme. Burada bireyin sorumluluğu nerede? Bakın ben lisedeydim. Aklıma geldi şu anda. Bu kitapta kimlik istemem yazımın, kitabıma adını veren yazımda anlattığım hikaye. Etnik kimliğimden dolayı hakaretlere uğrayınca çok üzülmüştüm. Kenara çekildim falan neyse detaylara girmeyeceğim. Alevi bir arkadaş kızcağız bilmiyordum Alevi olduğunu tabii. Beni kenara çekti. Sana bir şey söyleyeceğim dedi. Söyle dedim. Biliyor musun ben Aleviyim dedi. Tamam. Alevi kimliğini söyleyemiyor ve fısıltıyla bana söylüyor. Sınıf boşalmış hiç kimse yokken. Bugüne kadar bu bende kaldı fakat hep düşünürüm. O kızcağıza bunu yaşatan kim? Devlet bunu yapıyor tamam. Fakat yine geldik yalana, iftiraya. Ona inandığımız için biz de sorumluyuz, biz de suçluyuz. O Alevi komşumuza mum söndü yalanlarıyla onları dışlatan, böyle olmasını, öteki olmasını bize dayatan egemenlere neden boyun eğiyoruz? Neden onların bu suçlarına ortak oluyoruz? Bu noktaları düşünmemiz gerekiyor. Acılarda insanın birleşip duygularda birbirimizi anlamak zorundayız. Bakın bu yaşadığım, anlattığım şey Ermeni kadının başına gelen Daha sonra Kürdünün de geldi, Alevinin de geldi. Bugün Türk kadınının başına geliyor. Acı aynı acı. Oradaki o insanlık dramı, insanlığın, o sadece Ermeni'nin derdi değildi. Bunu da anlamak gerekiyor. O hepimizin derdi. Hepimizin derdi. Ve bugün de bir başkasına olan, dün gördüm bir kızcağız işte hapishanede öldürülmüş, intihar dediler. Bu hepimizin derdi olmalı, üzülmeliyiz. Bunu becermek zorundayız. Bu kutuplaşmanın önüne, bu birey, her birey kendi üzerinde çalışacak, düşünecek, oturup bir düşünecek.
So, polarization is also leading to marginalization, to alienation. The state is using this against us. Before they talked about the Gavur, so those who weren't Muslim, then they talked about communists, about Kurds, about Alevites. They created these artificial fears of these people. And we were complicit because we gave into this fear, we gave into these lies, we believed them. I just remembered when I was a teenager, I had been insulted because of my identity. And so I just marginalized myself. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I hid away. And one day a girl who I didn't know was Alawite came up to me and she whispered, "I'm an Alawite." And up to this day, I've still been wondering what made her feel this way? What made her whisper? What made her so afraid? So it was all of us. We all allowed her to feel afraid like this. We have to understand that when it's an Armenian woman who's suffering, when she's claimed by the Agar for her first night, this also happens afterwards to Kurds, to Alawites, it happens to Turks. So we all suffer the same suffering. When a woman dies in prison, actually we're all dying. We have to understand that this human tragedy concerns all of us. We all have a responsibility in not being complicit to these lies and rebelling against them.
Suçu işleyen evladımız bile olsa, babamız olsa, dedemiz olsa arkasında durmamamız gerekiyor. Bunu da öğrenmemiz gerekiyor. Suçun savunulacak bir yanı yok.
Even if it's our child or our grandfather or a relative who is committing this crime of lying, we shouldn't defend them. We shouldn't stand by them. There's no way to defend such crimes.
Şiddeti savunduğumuz zaman o diyor sonradan hepimizi vuruyor o şiddet. Ne yazık ki.
If we defend violence, this violence will turn against all of us.
Bilmiyorum vaktim var mı yoksa?
I don't know if I have any more time or should I cut it short here?
Zamanımızı doldurduk aslında. Ben müsaadenizle Despina Hanım'a da bir soru sorup session'ı çok teşekkür ederim. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Demek istiyorum yalnız. Şu anda benim baktığımda sosyal medyada her yerde papağanlar diyorum ben artık çok özür dileyerek ama bu papağanlar bir şeyi ezberleyip bir yerde okumuş, bir yerde duymuş. İnsana papağan olmak yakışmıyor. İnsana düşünmek yakışıyor. İnsana onurlu bir duruş yakışıyor. İnsana sevgi dili kullanmak yakışıyor. Bunu söylemek istiyorum. Şiddet dili hiç yakışmıyor insana.
Today, when I look at social media, I just see parrots parroting the same words over and over again. Human beings are not supposed to be parrots. They're supposed to think. They're supposed to have an honorable stance, and they're supposed to speak the truth.
Yeah, thank you so much, Angel. Yeah, Despina, the question is, what's your suggestion to urge those in power to take immediate actions for the refugees that are not let in countries and left to inhuman conditions by the borders? And I would like to extend this question by adding the Kurdish people who are stuck on, Poland and Belarus borders, for example. It's just one of the examples of these cases.
Oh. Well, actually, and on polarization, even though, I speak on Greece and not on Turkey, I agree with Mr. Phillips, Professor Phillips, that it should be people in Turkey that take up this. But given that in 2013, I came to Istanbul and with my very dear friend Osman Kavala, we discussed setting up the schools of political studies of the Council of Europe. And he, with somebody that is in the group that Mrs. Arikan is accused for the Gezi protests, established a school in Istanbul. and all they actually are doing this past 7-8 years is trying to actually work addressing this polarization. And I think that the work that they do might be low profile, might be small in numbers, but is amazing. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to say that there is so many people that are working against this, and this is where we place our trust. As regards refugees, I think that a great danger is really, but a great challenge as well, is the rewriting of the Geneva Convention that is looming ahead. As I said before, Geneva Convention was came after the very painful experiences, and I totally agree with Angel that it's pain that should teach us more. And even though in Turkey it is not fully ratified or accepted, it provided a framework for asylum seekers since the 1950s. Mm-hmm. Political realities are pushing for its revision. And actually its revision to sliding back to restriction of provisions, to actually granting the right to seek asylum to far less human beings and for far shorter periods, with far less freedom of movement. Of course, this really goes against human history, and it goes against what is happening in the world, and how movement has always been cornerstone of human existence. But then states always imagine that they can regulate our existence on this planet. I would like to stress that restrictive border policies and migration management practices have to be seen within what is today the common European asylum system and the so-called European acquis. I'm trying to be very pragmatic here. I could tell you a million wonderful things that I would like to see, but trying to see what is possible at this moment is that, at least in the case of Greece, but also in the case of far more recent, but also sharp cases like what is happening in Poland, Ukraine, the Baltic states, the border with Belarus, is that EU law establishes rules and principles of a recognition of status in member states, but it also governs returns based mainly on the Dublin II regulation and the Returns Directive. Both instruments, combined with the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union and the International European Human Rights Law, set a number of minimum rules and safeguards so that returns are realized in accordance with the law and with full respect to the rights of persons transferred, returned. And there is established case law by European jurisdictions and international mechanism that clearly forbids pushbacks and Dublin transfers among EU member states. So really, abiding by the law and practicing rule of law is what EU member states should do. And it is something that they are increasingly forgetting. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Why the practice?
Yeah, thank you so much. So this brings us to the end of the panel. I would like to thank you all for your contribution. It was really great. I mean, I learned a lot from each of you. So now I am inviting Hafsa back to, end the panel. Hafsa, you are muted.
Sorry, technical issues. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you a lot to the speakers, to you as the moderator, Büşra. It was an amazing discussion again. And I listened to all the speakers in these 3 panels on the verge of thinking on, okay, what should be done, and also on the verge of, feeling all the intense emotions that they are carrying on while speaking, while doing their speeches. Thank you so much. And we have come to the end of Freedom Convention Turkey 2021. And we have listened to exclusive, amazing speakers touching on the highly significant human rights issues on this Day of Human Rights. And I'd like to thank all of the speakers and the audience. I also want to extend many thanks to our volunteers who made such an important event possible. Let's say, until the next year convention, stay safe, free, and peaceful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.